And we're back. Today it's something a little bit different. This is the Good to Great series with FinFloor, and today we're on site. Today we are talking about site assessment for glue down LVT, and this is where the installers really need to pay attention to the detail. Make sure you do a proper and thorough site assessment. Otherwise it could bite you, and most probably will further on down the line. Doesn't matter what your site is, whether it's an apartment block, a single bedroom, or a lovely beach house like what we have here behind me. You need to pay attention to the climate, you need to pay attention to the current status of the screed, and you need to check how strong, level, and secure that screed is, because your floor installation is totally dependent on that substrate. If that moves, has moisture in it, starts to crack, whatever the cause, it will impact your floor and it will impact your project's longevity. Obviously, the first thing that you do when you walk onto site is you're checking for the obvious. You're checking for undulations, you're checking for the integrity of the substrate. You'll note it here on this job site where it's actually a fantastic super flat substrate already. They've really put a lot of time and attention into the topping, but most jobs aren't like this. And you most probably will have to lay a 5 to 6 millimeter self-leveling compound. But when you're applying your self-leveling compound, you need to make sure that it's going to properly bind to that topping. In this case, we're going to be checking for moisture. It's a new build from the ground up, and what we've assessed is that this slab has moisture of between 4.5 and 6 on the new Tramex CME5. That's too much moisture. So for this installation, we're definitely going to have to either wait it out and let it dry, or because of our timeline, we're going to have to put down a moisture barrier. But there's a whole lot of other things that I'm also looking at. I'm looking at these expansion lines. These are going to need to be filled in, but I'm not going to compromise the floor in some way or form. This is where a good conversation between you and the project manager to understand fully the site's requirements. These pre-site meetings are absolutely critical. Do not assume anything, because this is going to totally catch you out. One of the best devices in a pre-site assessment is your phone. Taking photographs of everything at every stage. I have referenced old photographs when projects have gone bad too many times to count. I've been able to pick up further details. I've got a recorded date timestamp of when I assessed the project, and these have helped me determine and prove that I have done the necessary steps required for the contract. When you're taking photographs of any pre-site inspection or detailing thereafter, take a photograph of the detail close up, and then take a secondary photograph showing a little bit of perspective so that you can see where the detail is in location to the room. So many times I see a photograph of a moisture meter that's taking a high reading or a low reading or whatever, but it shows no context of where that photograph is. It could be on another job site, in a north-facing room versus a south-facing room. You need to prove the point. So be careful when you're taking these photographs. Close up first, then a perspective shot. And while we all lose phones, maybe a good idea is to email them to yourself. It's great having a backup diary, whether it's in your inbox, a cloud, worst case scenario, send it to the client. So before I get into assessing how much screed I want to throw down on a slab in preparation for LVT, I want to make sure that the scrap is integrous. So I can do this in a couple of different ways. I like to do all three of these assessments. First would be a hammer test. I actually want to impact, and I want to listen to the sound that that impact of the hammer to the screed is going to make. Very quickly, you're going to be able to ascertain to whether that surface is actually dense to the right MPa in its entirety. You can use a Smith hammer, but not everybody has one. So a good, like a rebar or a hammer, and going and tapping the floor around, making sure that that topping layer is properly bound and has a viable depth to it. If you're just going to focus on doing a scratch test, maybe with your keys or a screwdriver, I've been caught out before where the scratch test turned out A-okay, but 3 mils down, It was like a biscotti. It was crumbly, it was overwatered topping, and it would have failed so quickly had I gone any further. Another thing you want to look out for is porosity. Obviously, we work on different types of substrates. You want to make sure that whatever your self-leveling compound, your primer, your moisture barrier, obviously, as always, you want to follow the manufacturer's application instructions. But porosity makes a huge contribution to whether that product needs to pull into the surface or whether you're going to have to put a primer over the top with a particulate to create a mechanical surface on which your primers and your self-leveling compounds are going to be able to grab onto. This is easily done with just sprinkling a little bit of water onto the surface, and if it pulls in, good to go. You know there's porosity there. Or if it's just totally beating on the surface and not actually sinking in, you know you need to look a little bit further. Okay, so we're getting a little bit closer to understanding that we're going to be throwing a self-leveling compound, but how much compound do we actually throw down? Well, this is the time when you bring out your straight edge and you start measuring the room out, left to right, up and down, or you can use a string with a pin in one side and actually pulling it across the floor, trying to ascertain where the highs and where the lows are. A great opportunity here is that if you do have high spots, you can grind those down. Grinding down high spots is grossly going to reduce your self-leveling compound depth requirement. And that's going to save the client money and potentially bring your bid closer into that acceptable price point that's going to secure that work for you. So ascertaining the high points, grinding the heads down, these are all notes that you should be taking for your installation team who potentially and hopefully will follow on afterwards. A lot of these self-leveling compounds have a minimum depth. So in my experience, we generally tend between a 2.5 and a 5 millimeter pooled screed. You want to make sure that you're going to be throwing down the right MPa strength as required by the adhesive manufacturer, which hopefully is the same manufacturer as your self-leveling compound. I love using systems so that whatever the system is for the moisture barrier, primer, same system brand for the self-leveling compound and the adhesive. When you use a system, you ensure that supplier's warranty on the process. And if you've got a problem, you can call them out. It gets a lot more difficult when you have a system that's made up of different suppliers' products, because then everybody's going to be pointing fingers at everybody else if something goes amiss. So my 10 cents worth of advice, stick to a system. This is all about security and ensuring the longevity of the install and securing your business as well. When assessing depths, we need to make sure that we're also assessing what the floor is going to marry up against. Maybe your LVT is going to marry up against some cementitious tiles, the aluminium beading along a stacker slider door. These are all things that we need to think about when we are thinking about the height levels. And height levels are going to impact the price, because the more product you throw down, the higher the price is for the consumer. These little details need to be explained to the consumer, because when they're comparing one bid versus another, they say, oh, 60 bags of self-leveling compound on this quote versus only 30 on that. What is the difference? What is their experiential difference or security in the end result? These are elements that you need to explain in order to ensure the success rate of your bid. Moisture assessment. This is one of the biggest reasons for failure when it comes to glue down LVTs, especially where here in South Africa, predominantly we're going over a cementitious substrate. Now, not everybody has a moisture meter. Please understand, you should have a moisture meter. It's an essential tool for any professional floor fitter, but let's be realistic here. A lot of installers do not have a moisture meter. You need to apply the logic and the science of how to assess the job site. It can be as simple as taping down a sheet of plastic, DPM, 1 meter by 1 meter, to the substrate in 3 or 4 different areas of your install site. Tape it down properly so that there's no air transfer or dust transfer underneath the plastic as it goes through a 24-hour cycle. What's going to happen is that moisture, if there is any, or high levels of moisture, are going to radiate and elevate through the topping. They're going to form condensation on the underside of that plastic. So when you peel back the plastic the day after, if there's moisture condensation, you've got a problem and you need to explore further. That is a simple indicator of whether there is or there isn't going to be moisture. Ultimately, you need a moisture meter. I'm using a Tramex CME5 here, latest state of the art. It's a fantastic tool. It's an investment in your job security. Just think of it, if one job goes amiss and you have to step in and do a remedial, it's going to cost you way more than the cost of a single moisture meter. When we start exploring the different types of moisture meters, a surface non-destructive moisture meter where you're just applying to the surface, like this Tramex CME5, it only measures 25 mil into the depth of the substrate. So you need to be careful. You need to understand what is going on with the job site. And if you have any reason for concern, you need to go and get the attached probes. Drill in an 80 mil depth hole, 2 holes, and put the probes and measure deep into that slab. Because as soon as you put an impervious layer over that slab, moisture is going to radiate and equalize across the depth of that slab between your new impervious moisture barrier on top, which would most probably would be your LVT, and the DPM that should be in the slab. The moisture is going to equalize, it's going to come up, and while it was dry for the surface with the Tramex, it's not reading the moisture below, and that's going to catch you out. Moisture impacting the adhesive is ultimately re-emulsify that adhesive and turn it to cottage cheese, where when that LVT is expanding and contracting, it's actually going to release the plank. The plank's going to be able to move, so that's where you start getting gaps, planks actually delaminating from the surface, a whole host of headaches, and it's all going to fall back on the installer. For myself, as a part-time flooring inspector for the South African Wood and Laminate Floor Association, if I have to come onto a job site for an LVT failure, one of the first things I'm going to request in my pre-brief is there any proof of moisture testing done prior to installation? If you don't have those photographs before inspection, unfortunately things start pushing against you very quickly, and it's going to become even more difficult to prove that you are not the weakest link in this installation. Installing floors is a good profession to get into. We have a global shortage of competent installers. So what does that tell you? We have a whole world of, unfortunately, poor installers who do not understand the science. There is fantastic money to be made if you know how to go about installing these floors safely and beautifully. You can charge fantastic rates. People are willing to pay good rates for good installers. Understand the science, get the right tools for the job, and get the job done right first time. Thank you for watching another edition of Fin Floors Good to Great. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode.